from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Matthew. We begin with breaking news from the White House this evening. President Trump just now signing the just-passed House funding bill into law. Ending a brief, partial government shutdown, it is officially over, and now starting the clock on negotiations over ICE funding that could have us in this exact same position 2 weeks from now.
This bill is a great victory for the American people. Instead of a bloated and wasteful omnibus monstrosity full of special interest handouts, we've succeeded in passing a fiscally responsible package that actually cuts wasteful federal spending while supporting critical programs for the safety, security, and prosperity of the American people. And this group of people behind me and others, and a lot of votes, they really have done a fantastic job.
The president speaking in the Oval Office just moments ago there and taking some questions from reporters, including Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who's now making her way out to our cameras on the North Lawn. For the latest details on that funding vote and where things go from here, let's go to Capitol Hill right now. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson, who's had a busy day, joining us live from the Hill. Erik, they got this done. What happens in 2 weeks?
You know, it's going to be a limited shutdown, I expect, of the Department of Homeland Security. It's going to be very hard for them to come to terms on new restraints on ICE and Border Patrol agents. Democrats have a long list of demands, including judicial warrants and taking masks off that Republicans are really not willing to entertain. And it's just very hard. The House would have to pass this very early next week for the Senate in order to take it up and get it done by February 13th. I don't see that happening. But, you know, the Department of Homeland Security could run on, sort of a mini shutdown for a while. ICE agents, Border Patrol will continue to be paid from the One Big Beautiful tax bill money. But, you would see, FEMA workers and TSA workers missing a paycheck that's due on February 17th. So this is going to be unpleasant for those individuals. But the bigger story today is that 5 parts of this bill fully fund, those elements of the government through September 30th, State Department, Treasury, and really reversing a lot of those DOGE cuts to medical research, foreign aid. It was a real compromise from Republicans and Democrats and kind of put Congress back in the driver's seat of the power of the purse.
Erik, several Republicans were against this, and it was actually President Trump that spoke to him and turned things around. Do you envision that happening next time as well?
Well, it would depend on what kind of deal the Trump administration would strike. Certainly, if he does, any sort of deal with Democrats, there will be some on the far right that would resist that. In this particular case, there was an attempt to hijack a procedural vote in order to get attached a voter ID requiring bill. That's really in trouble in the Senate, and not only among Democrats, but there are members of the Republican Party who don't want to see federal control over elections, which are really the province of the states. So there was an attempt to attach this. They ended up backing down under pressure from the White House and from Speaker Johnson. But it was a dicey moment for a second there. And then ultimately the bill passed 217 to 214. A close vote because progressives were against it for even 2 weeks of funding. So it squeaked by. But I do think it's going to be very dramatic in 2 weeks when the Homeland Security bill runs out on February 13th.
Something tells me we'll be talking before then, Erik. It's great to have you back. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson with the very latest from Capitol Hill. The other major developing story for us tonight, U.S. Central Command now confirming that an American F-35 fighter jet shot down an Iranian drone in self-defense as it was approaching the USS Abraham Lincoln, now steaming its way through the Arabian Sea. That aircraft carrier arrived in the region just last week after President Trump said he would send in the military if Iran were to continue its punishment of protesters. Despite striking down Iran's drone, the president telling reporters a short time ago that diplomatic talks remain ongoing.
They are negotiating. They'd like to do something, and we'll see if something is going to be done. They had a chance to do something a while ago, and it didn't work out, and we did Midnight Hammer. I don't think they want that happening again, but they would like to negotiate. We are negotiating with them right now, yes.
All right, for the latest on this and the other breaking news coming out of the president's Oval Office signing moments ago, we turn to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who joins us live from the North Lawn. She was in the room and asked a few questions of the president. Tyler, it's great to have you back with us, and thanks for getting back out to our cameras. What does this mean for the way forward in Iran? We've got two parallel stories here. You were with the president just now. Did he say what's next?
Well, Joe, at this point, the president confirmed that the talks scheduled for later this week are still on the table, though he declined to specify the location, the venue, and the format that these talks are going to take place, considering that there has been reporting that Iran is now asking for a change when it comes to where they are going to happen, reporting that they are supposed to take place in Turkey, but could now be moving to Oman. And it comes, as you mentioned, we saw a recent escalation in tensions today. Of course, this Iranian drone struck down from the U.S. as it headed towards the USS Lincoln. But then also earlier today, there was reporting and confirmation from the U.S. that Iranian gunboats attempted to seize a U.S.-flagged oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, about raising these questions about exactly where these planned talks are going to be headed. It is our understanding the U.S. delegation is being led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And our analysts at Bloomberg Economics say while these talks still remain on the table, they are likely a stalling tactic. One, on Iran's side to get a little bit more breathing room, and two, on the U.S.'s side to try to leverage them in these negotiations going forward, because the White House has laid out some of those firm demands that they would like to see, including that there will be a dismantling of Iran's nuclear program and a total end to nuclear enrichment, as well as a suspension of all of Iran's stockpiles. But at this point, Joe, we haven't gotten confirmation on what Iran will actually be willing to put on the table as we watch these negotiations, and whether or not they could escalate to something further.
Yeah, Tyler, we just saw the president, though, and he really seemed to point to a diplomatic solution. How possible do you think that really is at this point?
Well, Julie, at this point, the White House itself maintains that all options remain on the table, and that also includes, of course, military strikes. And we know that the U.S. has moved assets into the region, where you're talking about the USS Lincoln, which is part of that Armada buildup in the Middle East. Yet at the same time, we've also seen signals that perhaps this buildup of assets doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a large-scale strike. Instead, our own analysts have assessed that it is more likely that if the U.S. does pursue the option of military action, it would be more targeted strikes. But at this point, we're going to have to see how these negotiations ultimately develop. If they do take place later this week, they will mark the first public talks between the U.S. and Iran since we saw tensions escalate over the past month.
We're spinning a couple plates here in the news today, Tyler, and I just want to get back as well to what took place today on Capitol Hill and what's about to happen. We've now got the government reopen again. And you just spent some time asking the president about negotiations for possible restrictions on ICE. Let's let our listeners and viewers in on that back and forth.
How the talks are going for potential changes to the Department of Homeland Security. Have you agreed to any specifics?
None. Well, we have a secure border. In fact, we have 9 months now where nobody has come into our country illegally. Now, I don't know if I can believe that, because, you know, you go from 25 million people to nobody, but the Democrats do that. You know, they're leaning left, the people that do that report. And for 9 months, they have said nobody has come into it. It is a strong, great border. We do have people coming into our country, but they're all coming in legally. You take a look at that and look at what was going on a year and a half ago on our border, where criminals were coming in, drug dealers were coming in, people from mental institutions were coming in. The worst, you know, they say the worst, I don't even know if I like the term, but the worst of the worst was coming into our country. And now we have virtually our country it's beautiful to see.
There you have it. The answer to Tyler's question, Tyler, he has not indicated many particulars, correct, when we consider the unmasking of agents or warrantless raids. Have we heard more?
No, Joe, I mean, at this point, I asked the president that question as a priority because we are now on a deadline. February 13th is when funding is going to run out for the Department of Homeland Security, and it has been our understanding that that stopgap measure was put into place in order to facilitate negotiations between the White House and Democrats when it comes to curbs on immigration and customs enforcement. But as you heard President Trump there, he says that he hasn't made any firm commitments, despite this being part of the deal in order to get that partial partial government shutdown resolved. Senator Lindsey Graham was also in the room. He went on to tell us reporters that Republicans are going to hold firm on their own demands when it comes to immigration, appearing to balk at some of the Democratic requests here. As you mentioned, these new warrant requirements, also that federal agents conducting immigration raids would be unmasked as part of this. Now, we can say that there had appeared to be some bipartisan movement towards some of those potential reforms, including that the DHS Secretary Kristi Noem had announced yesterday that agents on the ground in Minnesota would start to wear body cameras. That was applauded from both sides of the aisle, including President Trump himself. But if you ask Democrats on Capitol Hill, they are telling you that they need to see some of these changes codified into law in order for that DHS government funding to be funded through the rest of the fiscal year.
Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall reporting live from the White House North Lawn. Thank you for rushing out to do that for us. And keeping an eye on Capitol Hill, earlier today before the House vote, we spoke with Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas, who serves on both the Senate Finance Committee and Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We asked him about the result of the recent special election in his state, but we started the conversation by discussing the current asks from Democrats to change how ICE agents operate. Take a listen.
Well, I'm always for seeing how we can improve current operations, and that includes ICE. And I believe Mr. Homan, who's now in charge up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, has said the same thing. But I don't believe there is enough time to open this whole range of topics, nor do I think we should, because these are professional law enforcement officers. One of the main problems and what's happened in places like Minneapolis is these are sanctuary jurisdictions. They don't cooperate with law enforcement at the federal level. And so ICE has no alternative but to make these detentions in the general population. And of course, you have various instigators interrupting and interceding, sometimes with disastrous consequences. So I don't think, I think while certainly these institutional reforms are important, and I would support trying to make it better, this unfortunately is part of the same sort of strain of thought that gave us defund the police and abolish ICE. And I think we have to enforce the law, and that's what President Trump believes as well.
Are you, just to be clear, open to demasking ICE agents when they're working in the field?
I think that's an insult to ICE agents. We know that ICE agents are going to be targeted by some of these instigators, what I call really, they are essentially asking for anarchy, certainly chaos, because if we abandon the rule of law, that's all we have left. And so these ICE agents are being targeted by some of the anti-ICE instigators, and I think in some instances their identity should be protected. But this is just, to me, just a ridiculous request.
Wow. Well, just to be clear, before we move on to some other issues here, Senator, following these two fatal shootings that we saw in Minneapolis, you don't feel any different about restrictions on ICE?
Well, I think the main thing that needs to be done is that the Minneapolis and Minnesota needs to quit refusing to cooperate with federal law enforcement officers. You don't see this happening in Texas, because when illegal aliens are apprehended for some state or local violation, they are routinely handed over to ICE at the jail and then subject to deportation. But when local law enforcement or state law enforcement in some of these sanctuary jurisdictions don't do it, ICE has no alternative but to try to go knock on a door and make an arrest when they believe they have an illegal alien evading apprehension, excuse me. So I think, unfortunately, in both of these instances, these individuals did not cooperate with law enforcement, and unfortunately, when that happens, tragedies like this occur, which are regrettable. But I think the answer to it is for these sanctuary jurisdictions to cooperate with federal law enforcement so that federal immigration laws can be enforced, hopefully without these kind of tragedies occurring.
Senator, one more quick question on this. So you don't think really any reforms are needed, or is there anything you would be open to changing about ICE?
No, I didn't mean to suggest no reforms would be necessary, but I think as Tom Homan said, and by the way, I think he's the right guy for the job, this has escalated totally out of control. And I think everybody realizes that, and it needs to de-escalate. And I think Mr. Homan has been the voice of a seasoned professional who has been applauded by Democrat administrations and Republican administrations to try to bring some order out of this chaos. But the simple answer is that while ICE may need to fine-tune some of its procedures in order to try to de-escalate and avoid conflict, that's a two-way street. And these sanctuary jurisdictions need to cooperate with law enforcement in the interest of de-escalating and avoiding some of these tragedies.
Senator, I do want to turn now to our home state of Texas and Texas Senate District 9, the Democrat, really a shocking upset in that race there. Does it concern you as you are up for re-election this year?
It does concern me. As we know, these special elections are notoriously volatile, and I know a lot of people are trying to figure out exactly what happened here. A district that President Trump won by 17 points, and then the Democrat won by a swing of to 16 points. And so a huge swing there. Some of it had to do with a small turnout. I think it was about 15% of registered voters. But the quality of the candidates and the nature of the campaigns also matter. And obviously what the candidates were, the Republican candidate was campaigning on was not something that was received well by the voters. So I think there's going to be more analysis to this, and there's a lot of different reasons why this could have occurred, but hopefully we'll learn the lessons from this disastrous outcome.
What are your thoughts on nationalizing elections, Senator? The president was in an interview yesterday on Dan Bongino's show and said we should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. Is that something you support?
Well, there is one area where I do believe there should be a standard of voter identification. You're familiar with the SAVE Act, the Save America Act,
yes,
which I support. That is not a takeover of state-run elections, but what it does require at an irreducible minimum is that American citizens be allowed to vote, and anyone who can't produce the appropriate identification would not be allowed. And that's a matter of protecting the integrity of the ballot.
But you do think states should continue to administer elections as per the Constitution?
I do. But I do think that in those blue states, particularly where they don't have these same sort of integrity measures that we have in Texas and are in other states, that a requirement of proof of American citizenship and voter ID is something that is supported on a bipartisan basis. Makes a lot of sense. So that's why I support the Save America Act.
Senator, before we let you go, we do want to touch on foreign affairs very quickly. What should happen next in Iran?
Well, the president's got a very tough call here. Obviously, Iran is the #1 state sponsor of international terrorism, is responsible for most of the misery and mischief that's occurring in the Middle East, including the October 7th attack in Israel by Hamas, one of their proxies. They have, of course, been trying to develop nuclear weapons. They have long-range ballistic missiles that threaten our allies in the region. And the president, I know, is being presented with a range of options here. The real question, I think, Julie, is what comes next. If the supreme leader is deposed, usually what happens in these countries like Venezuela and Iran is they are virtual police states, and the leadership, the authoritarian leaders, basically kill all their competition, and they destroy the institutions that would be there once they are deposed. So this is going to be a hard decision by the president because there's no easy answer in Iran.
Do you support another round of strikes then, Senator? Is it time to hit Tehran?
Well, I think that is one of the things that the president, I'm sure, is being presented, because they have the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Quds Force, as it's called, which are the primary tools or instruments of international terrorism emanating from Tehran with through its proxies. So that the president may decide that that's an appropriate target.
Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas speaking with us earlier today on Bloomberg TV and radio. Coming up, AMD Supermicro up next in line, reporting after the bell and sending the stocks moving in the after-hours trade. We'll bring you those details. Power moves. Romaine is on the way from New York on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Joe Matthew. I'm Julie Fine. Earnings reporting season rolling along with AMD and Supermicro reporting today in after-hours trading. For the details, let's turn now to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Hi, Romaine.
Hey, Julie. Yeah, kind of interesting story here. Two companies big in the AI space, AMD and SMCI, with two distinct businesses. AMD, of course, makes the high-end chips that go into servers. SMCI actually makes those servers. AMD came out with their earnings, and it was a bit of a disappointment, not so much as to what happened in the most recent quarter, but the idea that they weren't more aggressive in their guidance. We should point out, this is still a company growing revenue at about a 30 to 40% clip per year, which is phenomenal by any measure. But a lot of investors wanted to see if they can do more, and more importantly, whether their chips, the new chips that they're trying to develop, can actually match the computing power of NVIDIA. You see the share reaction there. Apparently, they did not necessarily get enough of what they wanted out of that earnings report and out of that conference call. Meanwhile, SMCI moving to the upside. That's a server maker. This is a company that's been in a lot of trouble. They had some accounting issues a couple of years ago, but they're now guiding much more aggressively, saying that they see a return to growth and they see the AI boom and the AI spending continuing going forward.
Supermicro clawing back. Romaine, I was really taken by your conversation today with the CEO of Novo Nordisk, one of the most important executives, certainly when it comes to pharma and more specifically GLP-1. Yeah. This has been a fascinating story, but the stock got clocked today on the sales forecast. Let's listen to what he said. Mike Dowstar speaking with Romaine earlier on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Of course, I can understand that negative numbers are not good news to the market, but once again, this is something that we had anticipated, and the obesity market is quite dynamic. And the reason the range has its numbers on each end is because so many things can happen.
I thought GLP-1 was the future, Romaine.
Well, it is the future, Joe. The problem is it's getting a lot more competitive. Remember, they were a pioneer in this space. This was kind of a sleepy insulin maker just about a couple of decades ago. And then in 2020, they took their old diabetes medicine, Ozempic, rebranded it as Wegovy at a higher dose, and it became a phenomenon. It was the only game in town. Then you had Zepbound. Now you have a bunch of generics coming onto the market. You have other weight loss pills potentially coming on the market out of Pfizer. And the big question investors really have for this CEO is, how are you going to actually hold up to that competition? Remember, they ousted the previous CEO last summer, and they put in Mike as to hopefully find a way forward here, at least for the most recent quarter and the guidance that he gave. They're not quite seeing it. He did assure us in that interview here, though, that this is the long game, and they do have a plan looking out past a year or so, but investors right now not buying it.
Really interesting. Lilly didn't have a great day either, for what it's worth. Sometimes they move in opposite directions. Lilly was down over $40. Tough day, I guess, across the board here when it comes to a lot of these stocks. Romaine, thank you. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick live from World Headquarters in New York. And Power Moves, an important part of our show every night. We'll have a lot more on that U.S. fighter jet coming up that shot down a drone as it aggressively, to use the words of the government, approached the USS Abraham Lincoln today. Republican Senator Ted Budd of North Carolina and Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois are next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Julie Fine. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us as we turn back to the major news today out of the Middle East. The U.S. Navy announcing it brought down an Iranian drone near its aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. The latest flashpoint in an escalating standoff, with U.S. Central Command confirming now that an American F-35 fighter jet shot down the Iranian drone in self-defense. CENTCOM saying that drone was headed toward the USS Abraham Lincoln. That's the aircraft carrier off the Iranian coast. The carrier arrived in the region last week after President Trump said he would send in the military if Iran were to continue its punishment of protesters. Now, despite striking down Iran's drone, the president told reporters that talks between Iranian leaders and his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, scheduled for Friday, are still expected to take place. Joining us now with his insights into all of this, live from Capitol Hill, Republican Senator Ted Budd of North Carolina, who importantly serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee as well, Commerce Committee. And Senator, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. This act by Iran, Senator, was this an act of war?
They are always testing us, and they have been for decades. I mean, there's the blood of American troops on Iranian hands, and this was an act of self-defense on our part, protecting our troops, and rightfully so. But again, they've always been testing us, and this was just another example of that, but more close up since we have put troops in the area.
Just to be clear, Senator, when we talk about self-defense, was the F-35 providing force protection for the Lincoln, or was that drone coming at the fighter jet today? Do you know?
Look, I think it was a Shahed 136, which is not exactly fast, and it was probably headed towards the Abraham Lincoln. So the self-defense was probably in defense of the Abraham Lincoln. I don't think the Shahed 136 would be any match for our F-35s.
Sounds like it.
Senator, you say that the United States is always being tested. Do you have any hope for a diplomatic solution here?
Look, if you look at the last 45 years of Iran, there are reasons to be doubtful, but you have a very skilled team. You have strength in President Trump, what he did with Operation Midnight Hammer, the success of Steve Witkoff in dealing with some very difficult situations. So let's wait and see. I think you need to at least give them a chance to bring them to the table. And if not, we have a lot of resources at our disposal. And this is humanitarian. I mean, this is for the thousands and thousands of folks that have died there. But even more importantly, this is against a nuclear Iran, which is absolutely something this world cannot tolerate. You have someone that shouts death to Israel and death to the United States, and we absolutely cannot have that. So that's the bottom line.
Senator, what does success look like in these talks?
Well, the first thing is a non-nuclear Iran, and we need to have absolute certainty for decades to come. We would like regime change. Again, we don't want boots on the ground. I think not getting into a forever war is something that America is very hesitant to get involved with. So, and Trump doesn't either. But Trump loves people. He loves our troops. He doesn't want the loss of American lives, and he doesn't want the loss of other lives around the world either. So if there was regime change, would be good. But again, no boots on the ground in a non-nuclear Iran.
Senator Budd, we spoke in the last week about the idea of a 2-week continuing resolution for the Department of Homeland Security. That's when this was being managed in your chamber. Now we've actually seen that codified in legislation. It's a 2-week CR. The House has passed it and the president signed it today. So we're open, but maybe only for days. And I'm wondering if you still feel the same way, because you didn't think 2 weeks would be enough to hammer out a negotiation on restrictions for ICE underneath the Department of Homeland Security. Do you feel any different today?
Well, we've got about 10 days left, and we're going to hurry to get whatever done that we can. But there's some good things. I mean, we've got troops, we've got them using body cams for their operations right now. I think that's a bipartisan idea. But 75% of Americans are for removing criminal illegal aliens. I think there's across the board, so that has to be bipartisan. But let's remember what the Democrats are actually shutting down. If they don't fix this issue, if they don't fund DHS, which I think we're for all as Republicans, but if you don't, you're shutting down the Coast Guard, you're shutting down TSA security at the airports, and you're shutting down FEMA. And I'm still in Western North Carolina having challenges getting reimbursements for FEMA. I mean, we work on this every single day. You've got Vermont and Peter Welch, again, that's a Democrat area dealing with FEMA. So, I just don't think this really gets at what the Democrats want to do. Americans are with us. 75% of people want criminal illegal aliens deported, and they're actually shutting down and hurting FEMA and the Coast Guard. So it makes no sense.
Yeah. John Thune has said you might need another CR or maybe another CR to hammer all this out. If that happens, Senator, federal workers in the departments you just mentioned are going to start missing paychecks, right?
They will. And look, if we're operating in good faith and having good negotiations and you just need a little more time, I get that. But I think we're in the right here. I think the American people are with us. They want TSA to work. They want a Coast Guard. They want FEMA to be there in the worst of times for them, like we had in Hurricane Helene. And that's what the Democrats are hurting. So I hope they really look closely at the details here of what they're trying to stop.
Senator, President Trump spoke just a short time ago. Part of that news conference, he talked about federalizing elections. Do you think this is something that should belong to the states, or do you think this is a good idea?
Well, what President Trump is after is the integrity of our elections. That's what he's really concerned about. 80% of Americans are for making sure that you're a citizen when you register to vote and verifying that. They're for having ID when you go to vote. So I think the Americans are with us on that. So if you have a federal law for that and then you leave the rest of it up to the states, I really think he's about the integrity and the security of our elections. That's really all this is about. And I think you're referring to the SAVE Act, which is, I think it's good policy, and it really gets at those issues which 80% of Americans believe.
We were actually referring to the comments that he made on the Don Bongino show yesterday. He said we should take over the voting, Senator, in at least 15 places. Quote, the Republicans ought to nationalize the voting, unquote. That would require a constitutional amendment, as far as I understand it. Would you support that?
Well, what I would be for is making sure that we're protecting the integrity and the security of our elections. I don't think you need to federalize it, but I think we can all agree on making sure that you have integrity. The way you get more voter turnout is that people know that their vote actually counts. I think if you don't do that, you end up demoralizing people. So let's just have voter integrity efforts, and that is what 80% of Americans support. I mean, they want, when you go to register to vote, which is important to do, if you haven't done it, please do it. And we think it's important that you show that you're a U.S. citizen. We want U.S. citizens determining U.S. elections. That's the bottom line of what we want.
Republican Senator Ted Budd of North Carolina, thanks so much for being with us. And joining us now with his perspective is Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. He serves on the House Oversight Committee and House Intelligence Committee. Thanks so much for being with us, Congressman.
So much, Julie and Joe.
I want to begin with what happened today. Now, there's no shutdown for now. However, 2 weeks from now, you could be in the exact same boat. How confident are you that DHS funding will be figured out in that period of time?
I'm hopeful, but it takes negotiating. And we have to make sure that there are important reforms with regard to the DHS. I just came from a hearing a joint Senate-House hearing with regard to what's happened with DHS and survivors and victims of violence that was committed by ICE and CBP. Coming out of that, you have to be kind of moved by the stories that people told. And I believe that certain reforms have to be done. Masks have to come off. ID has to be on. Body cameras have to be on. There has to be third-party investigations of the use of force. And you can't have roving gangs of ICE agents or CBP agents in cities going after U.S. citizens or anybody in the way that they have so far.
Well, we may have some trouble here, Congressman. We just spoke with Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas, who said this idea of forcing agents to take their masks off was insulting to their professionalism. Is that a good place to start negotiations?
I think it's absolutely essential. Without masks off, these agents are basically acting with impunity. They are not accountable. If they I actually was evicted in part by masked agents and CPD for quote unquote trespassing when I went to perform my congressionally mandated inspections or oversight of an ICE facility. So I think this is important.
Mm-hmm.
So, and as Joe just referred to what Senator Cornyn said, what would be acceptable as you try to iron this out?
Well, I think, again, I mentioned some of the reforms that have to happen. In addition, warrantless arrests are unacceptable. At one time, perhaps with an agency that you could trust, with people who actually abided by the law, some other manner of arrest might have been acceptable. But now I'm talking to people. I'm a non-white person, as you can tell. I talk to people every day who are U.S. citizens who basically fear being detained. And that is something that's completely wrong. It's against the Constitution, and it's happening right now with CBP and ICE, who are just picking up people without warrants.
Congressman, I'd like to turn your attention to what's happening or may be about to happen in Iran. It's difficult to tell where we are, but as we just discussed with Senator Ted Budd, the United States shot down an Iranian drone that was approaching the USS Abraham Lincoln today. And you know the saber rattling that's been taking place in the Indian Ocean. And now the president also has a parallel diplomatic track that he was asked about in the Oval Office a short time ago. Let's listen to what he said.
I can't tell you what I'm going to do because right now, we have a tremendous force going there, just like we did in Venezuela, even bigger. And they'll be there soon. And I'd like to see a deal negotiated. I don't know that that's going to happen. But, I mean, if I knew, I wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't tell you. I'd be very foolish if I would tell you. But right now, we're talking to them. We're talking to Iran. And if we could work something out, that'd be great. And if we can't, probably bad things would happen.
Probably bad things would happen, he said. Congressman Krishnamoorthi, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, are you getting briefed on this?
No. And this is unfortunately kind of sounds like the prelude to what happened in Venezuela, which would be, again, a violation of the War Powers Act. You need to come to the American people through the representatives to get their consent to deploy armed forces in hostilities. That's what the War Powers Act requires. Now, of course, in an emergency, the commander-in-chief and the president needs to defend us and needs to take appropriate action. However, in this situation, it appears very dangerous. And again, the American people do not want another endless war in the Middle East.
So best case scenario then from these talks, you did hear the president. He said he is somewhat optimistic. Your best case scenario for what happens in the next few days in this situation.
The best case scenario would be our negotiators working in concert with our friends, partners, and allies and others, basically come to a negotiated resolution with Iran over multiple subjects. Obviously, an end to their nuclear weapons program, but secondly, an end to their nefarious activities in the Middle East, their ballistic missiles program, their aid to the Houthis, Hezbollah, militias that attack us in Iraq and Syria. I think that should all be on the table, but you need to resolve it diplomatically, again, with our friends, partners, allies, and others.
I'm going to pick another point on your resume, your business card, maybe I should say, Congressman, and that's your role on the China Select Committee. The president is talking about Project Vault, and I'd love your thoughts on this, essentially a strategic mineral reserve. He talked about it a short time ago. Again, listen.
Today, we're launching what will be known as Project Vault to ensure that American businesses and workers are never harmed by any shortage. We don't want to ever go through what we went through a year ago. Just as we, although it did work out, thank you. Just as we have long had a strategic petroleum reserve and a stockpile of critical minerals for national defense, we're now creating this reserve for American industry so we don't have any problems.
Just to be clear, that's when he was signing the EO on this yesterday. Congressman, this would gather materials with $12 billion in seed money that need to be used in everything from cell phones to jet engines, as opposed to weapons that we spend so much time talking about. How important is this to best compete with China?
Strategic reserve is something we need to look at, but we need to do more than that, okay? I think that we have to fund research and development and through procurement get at synthetic critical minerals. We can actually develop it, and the science has actually proven that to be a viable solution. And then secondly, we have to work with our friends, partners, and allies, not push them away as we have through our trade and tariff policy, to potentially come up with maybe floors, price floors for the purchase of critical minerals, because what we know is over and over again, the Chinese Communist Party destroys their competition by flooding the market with critical minerals at costs even beneath the cost of production. And so if you have price floors, you can keep our businesses intact, and we can do it among our trusted partners potentially. But then again, you can't have chaotic trade policy, and you can't talk about invading Greenland and dumb things like that just hurt our broader initiatives, such as on critical minerals.
Glad you could join us, Congressman. Democrat Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. Thank you, as always. Coming up on Balance of Power, President Trump demanding $1 billion in damages from Harvard and the latest escalation between the administration and the university. We'll have details for you next and discuss with our political panel. That's all ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Julie Fine. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for being with us. We'll have a lot more on today's top stories when our political panel joins us up ahead. First, an update on the battle between Harvard and the White House after President Trump thrust the school back into the news cycle, dramatically ratcheting up the financial stakes of their showdown. The president demanding in a late-night Truth Social post $1 billion in damages from the university, a massive increase from the $500 million settlement the parties appeared to be closing in on last year to resolve a standoff over government research funding. That number may have been closer to 200. This should be a criminal, he writes, not civil event, and Harvard will have to live with the consequences of their wrongdoing. Though it was not clear what event he was referring to. Joining us now with their reaction to all the news in Washington today, this evening's political panel, Republican strategist Matt Gorman is with us. Communications officer, chief comms officer at Targeted Victory, alongside Democratic strategist Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden. It's great to have both of you here. Now that the government's reopened, we have something to celebrate this evening. We're awfully curious about the way forward, though. We've got a less than 2-week continuing resolution, so why don't we make a date to meet back here in 2 weeks and see if the government is still open. Did you hear John Cornyn on the broadcast when we asked him if demasking federal ICE agents should be part of this negotiation? He said that is an insult to the ICE agents and their professionalism. Does that give you hope in striking a deal?
I mean, I'm one of these people who, even if they do come up with a deal and demasking is part of that, along with warrants and not going into places of worship and schools to find folks, I just wonder how Democrats are going to enforce it. Like, as Congress has already shown that they are not going to enforce laws on this administration and the executive branch. So what makes them think that they're going to now be able to enforce these regulations if they do? So I think that the best that Dems can hope for is that they get Congress, or they get the Republicans on the record saying that they're going to do this, and then they can use, if they are supporting lawlessness, in their favor when they are running for their seats again in the midterms.
Wow. And the daylight you're going to get on this issue from Republicans, if there's any to be had, is not going to be from someone like John Cornyn, who has a very competitive primary on March 3rd. The first votes of 2026 will be there. Yes. He's in a very competitive primary in the state of Texas. So if you're looking for people to peel off, he's probably not one of them.
So he does not speak for the Republican-led Senate.
But I would also say this. I'm not sure. What I think the tricky part of this throughout the whole thing is if Democrats are going to fight, I guess I was a little surprised they didn't really hold fast and not agree to this 2-week extension, because 2 weeks, as we all know, is a lifetime in Washington today, in the Trump administration today, and what burned so hot and so fervently just a week ago, it can dial down very quickly in 3 weeks.
But how do they? 2 weeks can be a lifetime, but in this, it's probably not a lifetime. There's going to be a lot of reiterations and changes in the next few weeks over this.
Sure, but, again, getting mad enough to shut down the government over ostensibly circumstances that were sparked by something that happened 3 weeks to a month prior, it's not as urgent. And, again, who knows what we can see in between now and 3 weeks. So if they're holding fast and hoping that the public, that their liberal base and also disaffected Republicans, independents are as, perturbed by ICE tactics or what's going on in Minneapolis as they were 3 weeks ago, that's a bet.
Sounds like we might be shutting down in 2 weeks. If that's the case.
I actually don't think so. I think that the Democrats are going to have to, I think they're going to have some sort of negotiation. I don't think it's going to be everything that they want. But I also think that Democrats weren't willing to have people not have SNAP benefits and fund the military and go through that whole thing again that we went through in the fall. And also we have to remember, DHS and ICE are already funded. So this is just an additional funding. So I'm not really sure what the rub is to, I understand the negotiation. I understand this is a political fight.
And also really quick, in October, they were coming upon the subsidies expiring. So there was a finite date in the future with the government expiring. There's no finite date right now.
The Clintons are coming to Capitol Hill. It's a pretty interesting development today, as they did agree to testify before the House Oversight Committee. This is an Epstein related conversation, and it'll be February 26, 27. They will testify separately. Smart move to change their minds on this?
I mean, I don't think they want to go to jail, and I think that with this Congress and DOJ, I don't think that they really see the benefits of not being held in contempt and going to jail, but I'm just not really sure what they have to offer. They're not the ones that
What's
are...
Hillary Clinton going to say about this?
That's exactly right. So it's more political and just more fodder, and it's just more of a show.
Yeah. And also, do you think it's a good time for people to be really pointing to the Epstein files? I mean, how long do people want to keep that in the news?
Well, again, I think, as I've said repeatedly, I think it was very convenient that Democrats didn't care about this for 4 years, and then suddenly it's the most important issue. They want to talk about it all the time. I think, though, that Republicans are a little annoyed that all the fire has been directed on their side of the party. I think showing that the Democrats, namely Bill Clinton, was in a lot of these files as well, as a winner for them, as well as the fact that, it allows them to go on offense in a way they haven't been on this issue in quite a while.
But going after someone who hasn't been the president for 26 years versus someone who is in the Epstein files, who is currently the president, I think that's where Republicans here are having a little bit of trouble.
There's a little bit of a blast from the past, I guess. National elections we're talking about today, or nationalizing them. The president saying on the Dan Bongino show, we should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. We're in a world where we're asking every lawmaker if they support nationalizing elections, and I'm guessing that you're not going to be among them.
I mean, this is, first of all, Don Bongino, it's a joke that this is a show. Like, I just almost started laughing when you said that, so it's just sort of interesting here. But this is, get a constitution. This isn't even legal. I don't even know what we're talking about.
Amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did the president want to say that?
Well, I thought Democrats were the ones that wanted to nationalize elections. We went through that all last Congress. They had a big bill. But what I will say is this. I think when they're talking about voter ID, it was interesting today. CNN had a thing that was 80% of an issue. Now, look, I don't think it's what you want to fight on right now. But that issue, if for some reason down the road there's a filibusterless Senate, that's probably issue one.
Matt, do Republicans, though, want to be talking about nationalizing something when standing for states' rights?
Again, but voter ID is something I think that you see is broadly popular. If I can get on an airplane, if I have to go into a bar, but I also don't need it to vote, that's something I think that
that's not what they're saying. They're saying that they want you to have a passport. The SAVE Act has a passport, not being able to drive with your driver's license. So I think that's here the rub for Democrats.
I think any type of ID is fine.
Matt Gorman, Megan Hayes, got to cut it off there at that critical moment. Thank you so much. And tomorrow, don't miss the premiere of Bloomberg Deals. It's the only show of its kind dedicated to M&A and strategic moves, powered by Bloomberg reporting, analysis, and interviews with key players. Tune in for the first episode tomorrow at noon, right here on Bloomberg TV.
And thanks for being with us, as always, as well on Bloomberg Radio, where you can always find me. And we'll be back on the early edition of Balance of Power tomorrow. Alongside Julie Fite, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.